Members of the committee, it's an honor to be able to be part of this conversation around an issue that I think is of great importance for our country at a time of increasing global instability. Very briefly, my particular interest in this subject doesn't just stem from my current position as Minister for Education and Early Childhood Development in New Brunswick, but having worked as a democracy activist in multiple countries around the world, and coincidentally too, Cambodia and Nepal. I happened to be living in those countries at the point when China took an interest in those countries and effectively, economically, and in both cases, functionally, politically colonized them over a very brief period of time in the last decade before last now. When I look at any discussion around China, I think that it's important that we look at the reality of the horrifying headlines that we've seen here in our own country around residential schools in recent weeks. And as we like to say about past sins that our country has experienced, never forget and never again. And in this case, we appear to be doing just that in both cases with China. And not only that, but to be amplifying it. As a massive system of residential schools, internment camps, functionally concentration camps, is rolled out across the hinterland of one of our largest trading partners. And rather than speaking up against this vociferously, making that the centerpiece of our foreign policy, as you would expect a country that led the fight against fascism and for democracy in the Second War, and has been a voice with its soft power in the intervening decades. Instead, we're amplifying that message. And I'm speaking here specifically, not just about our general foreign policy failures, but about the experience of the Confucius Institute, a Chinese Communist Party branch operation operating inside public schools and universities in different places across Canada. Here in New Brunswick, the Confucius Institute gained a foothold back in the late 2000s and expanded to be reaching many thousands of New Brunswick students from both the primary and high school levels over the course of several years. Programs supposedly focusing on culture and language, in many cases included overt political propaganda. This included having elementary school students drawing maps of China that would erase the border with Taiwan, included a denial of the reality of Tiananmen Square, included the disciplining of students who raised questions around China's abysmal human rights record. So these are things that are happening in Canadian schools. So knowing this, and with the background that I had when I became minister in the end of 2018, I resolved to try and end the Confucius Institute's programs in New Brunswick, which resulted in an interesting series of lobbying efforts. The first one with a former premier of New Brunswick, Sean Graham, working as a lobbyist for Chinese interests, attempting me to maintain my relationships with Chinese schools, the Confucius Institutes operating here in the province, and New Brunswick curriculum-operated schools operating in China. And then, when that didn't work, somewhat surprisingly, the visit of the Consul General of China to my office without any of the normal diplomatic protocols that I'm well aware of from my past life in international politics and diplomacy, who attempted to pressure me into reversing a government decision, including threats of economic retaliations, turning this into a two-nation issue rather than a question of a disagreement over schooling. And that in turn led to members of the Chinese diaspora reaching out to me, expressing grave concern over the fact that their country of birth was reaching its tentacles into not just Canadian politics, but into our education system, which you would hope would be the place where what we would have as Canadian values, no matter how much we may argue around parliamentary and legislative tables across Canada about what that would mean, certainly does not include concentration camps, does not include mass murder, and doesn't include any of the myriad crimes routinely committed by the People's Republic of China and their various apologists supporting them around the world. So I'm looking forward to answering any questions that I can, both specifically about the Confucius Institute's operations here in New Brunswick, the reaction to the decision to cancel those programs, and anything else related to this subject. Thank you so much for the time to be able to appear for this committee.